August 14th, 1934, 11:22 p.m., Cicero, Illinois, a windowless basement behind a dry cleaner. The air is thick, a physical weight composed of cheap cigar smoke, stale rye whiskey, and the metallic tang of a cleaned revolver. 9 men sit around a heavy oak table. In the center, a single light bulb flickers, casting long, jagged shadows that dance like ghosts against the damp concrete walls. These aren't just street thugs. These are the erasers, the Chicago outfit's most surgical solution to legal problems. Click. The sound of a Zippo lighter snapping shut cuts through the silence like a gunshot. Frank, the Blade. Moretti exhales a plume of smoke, his eyes fixed on a grainy photograph pinned to the table. The man in the photo is Thomas the Canary Miller, a low-level accountant who made the mistake of keeping 2 sets of books, one for the boss and one for himself. Now he's the star witness in a federal racketeering case. He's in the safe house on 5th, Moretti says, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. The feds think a brick wall and 4 marshals are enough to keep a canary singing. They're wrong. To understand how we got to this basement, we have to look back 48 hours. The city was screaming. A major shipment of Canadian whiskey had been seized, and the paper trail led straight to the inner circle. Miller wasn't just a witness. He was a walking death sentence for the organization. The order came from the top. No trial, no witness, no survivors. The tension in the room is a coiled spring. These 9 men know the cost of failure. In this world, loyalty isn't a virtue. It's a survival mechanism. They check their watches. They check their clips. One man, a young recruit named Leo, wipes sweat from his palms. He's the only one whose hands are shaking. 10 minutes, Moretti whispers. Remember, we don't just kill him. We send a message that echoes all the way to D.C. But what none of them know, not even Moretti, is that the safe house isn't a trap for Miller. It's a cage for them. And by the time the sun rises, the streets of Cicero will be stained with a story that the papers will be too afraid to print. The first mistake wasn't the hit. The mistake was believing they were the hunters. 3 days earlier, the Gold Coast, Chicago. The rain in Chicago doesn't wash things clean. It just moves the dirt around. Thomas Miller stood under a flickering street lamp, his coat collar turned up against the chill. He was a small man, the kind of person you'd walk past 1,000 times and never remember. That was his greatest asset, and now his greatest curse. He knew where the bodies were buried, not the literal ones, but the financial ones, which in this city were far more dangerous. He met his contact, a federal agent named Miller, no relation, in the shadow of a closed butcher shop. The smell of sawdust and dried blood hung in the air. They know, don't they? Miller's voice trembled. He clutched a leather briefcase to his chest as if it were a shield. They suspect, the agent replied, his eyes scanning the rooftops. But as long as you have those ledgers, you're the most powerful man in Illinois. We move you to the Cicero safe house tonight. It's a fortress. Miller looked down at his shoes. He thought about his wife, Sarah, already hidden away in a different state. He thought about the life he had built on the crumbs of the outfit's table. He had traded his soul for a nice house and a quiet life. And now the bill was due. Back in the present, in that Cicero basement, the 9 men are loading into 2 black sedans. The engines hum with a predatory vibration. They move with the synchronized grace of a military unit. They have the floor plans. They have the schedule of the guard rotations. They have the keys. As the cars pull away from the curb, the city seems to hold its breath. The legend effect starts here, the whispered rumors of the Cicero slaughter that would haunt the underworld for decades. People say the birds stopped singing in that neighborhood an hour before the cars arrived. Moretti leans back in the passenger seat, feeling the cold steel of his .45 against his ribs. He thinks about power. He thinks about how easy it is to snuff out a life. But as they turn onto 5th Avenue, he notices something. A single black cat crosses the street, a cliché perhaps, or a warning. The hit was scheduled for 12:01 a.m. At 12 das, the lights on the entire block went out. August 15, 1934, 12:01 a.m., the safe house. The blackout was surgical. No blown transformer, No accidental surge, just a sudden, absolute void. The 9 men exited the vehicles in total silence. They wore dark trench coats and fedoras, their faces obscured by the shadows of the brim. They moved toward the brownstone, a silent phalanx of death. Inside the house, the 4 federal marshals reacted instantly. "Get the asset to the bathroom! Into the tub!" shouted Marshal Vance. He was a veteran of the Great War, and he knew the sound of approaching trouble even when it made no noise. The sound of boots on pavement, the rhythmic breathing of men with intent. Thump. The front door didn't just open, it exploded off its hinges. A flashbang grenade, a rare and terrifying piece of tech for the 30s, detonated in the foyer. The world turned white and ringing. The erasers moved in. They didn't spray bullets blindly. They moved in pairs, clearing rooms with a terrifying efficiency. Moretti led the charge up the stairs. He could hear the frantic scrambling of the marshals above. He could smell the fear. It smelled like sour sweat and ozone. "Miller, come out and we make it quick," Moretti yelled, his voice bouncing off the narrow hallway walls. A marshal leaned around the corner, his service revolver barking twice. One of the erasers, a man named Sal, caught a bullet in the throat. He slumped against the wallpaper, his blood blossoming like a dark rose against the floral pattern. He didn't scream. He just gurgled and slid down. 8 men left. The violence was intimate. In the cramped quarters of the brownstone, there was no room for tactical maneuvering. It was a brawl of lead and iron. The marshals were outgunned, but they were desperate. They knew that if Miller died, their careers, and likely their lives, were over. In the back bathroom, Thomas Miller huddled in the porcelain tub, his hands over his ears. He prayed to a God he hadn't spoken to in 20 years. He promised everything. He promised to be good. He promised to disappear. But the universe doesn't take bribes, and the door to the bathroom was about to splinter. 12:15 a.m. The upper hallway. The hallway was a slaughterhouse. 2 marshals lay dead near the linen closet, their bodies riddled with submachine gun fire. The erasers had lost another man, Leo, the young recruit. He lay face down, his hat rolling slowly toward the stairs. The blade Moretti didn't even look at him. In the outfit, a fallen soldier is just a budget cut. Moretti kicked the bathroom door. It held. He kicked again. On the 3rd strike, the wood groaned and gave way. Inside, the last marshal stood over the tub, his gun empty, clicking uselessly. Moretti didn't shoot. He stepped forward and drove a heavy knife into the man's chest. A professional strike, clean, silent. The marshal fell across the edge of the tub, his eyes locking onto Miller's for one final agonizing second before they went dull. Miller looked up at Moretti. He was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. "Please," he whispered, "I have money. I have the other books, the ones the feds don't have." Moretti smiled. It wasn't a kind expression. It was the look of a man who had already won. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver coin, a tradition in the Cicero branch, a payment for the ferryman. "The boss doesn't want your money, Tom," Moretti said, raising his pistol. "He wants your silence, and silence is the only thing that's free in this town." But as Moretti squeezed the trigger, a sound erupted from behind him. Not a gunshot, a whistle, a long, low, melodic whistle, the tune of St. James Infirmary. Moretti spun around. Standing in the doorway was a man who shouldn't have been there, a man the outfit had thought was dead for 6 months. He was dressed in a pristine white suit that defied the darkness of the room. He held a Thompson submachine gun with a drum magazine, and he was smiling. "Evening, boys," the man said. The table had turned. The erasers weren't the only predators in the house that night. 12:20 a.m., the blood-stained hallway. The man in the white suit was Silas, the ghost, Vane. He was a freelance cleaner who had once been the outfit's top earner until a deal went sour, and he was left for dead in a ditch in Indiana. Apparently, he didn't stay dead. The erasers, now down to 7, froze. Vane was a legend. They said he could hear a conversation through 3 inches of steel and that he never missed a shot. His presence changed the physics of the room. "Silas," Moretti spat, his grip tightening on his Gaue 45, "you're late for your own funeral." "Funny," Vane replied, the whistle still lingering on his lips. "I was just thinking the same about you. You see, the feds didn't hire me to protect Miller. They hired me to make sure nobody left this house. Information is a leak, Frank. And the feds want to plug it permanently. Both sides." The realization hit Moretti like a physical blow. This wasn't a rescue. This wasn't a hit. This was a double blind. The government wanted the outfit gone, and they wanted the witness gone, and they wanted the assassins gone. A clean slate. A total erasure. "Kill him!" Moretti screamed. The small bathroom and the narrow hallway erupted into a cacophony of violence. Vane dived into the bedroom across the hall, his Thompson spitting fire. The heavy .45 rounds from the erasers chewed up the door frames and the plaster. Dust and debris filled the air, making it hard to breathe. Miller, still in the tub, crawled under the body of the dead marshal, using the corpse as a shield. He was a spectator at his own execution. In the chaos, 2 more erasers fell. One was caught in the crossfire of his own men. The other took a burst from Vane's Thompson that nearly severed him in half. The house was no longer a home or a safe house. It was a meat grinder. The scent of gunpowder was so thick it tasted like copper on the tongue. Moretti looked at his remaining men. They were trapped, and Vane was laughing. 12:35 a.m. The kitchen. The fight had spilled downstairs. The erasers were trying to retreat, but the exits were blocked. Vane had rigged the doors from the outside before entering through the roof. It was a masterclass in urban warfare. Moretti, now accompanied by only 3 men, crouched behind the heavy kitchen island. Across the room, behind a tipped-over dining table, Silas Vane was reloading. "You're losing your touch, Frank," Vane called out. 9 men to kill 1 accountant, and you've lost 6 already. The boss is going to be disappointed, if he were still alive. Moretti's heart hammered against his ribs. "What do you mean, if?" "While you were busy playing commando," Vane shouted over a burst of gunfire, "the feds were raiding the Cicero headquarters. Your boss is currently in a holding cell or a body bag. The outfit is over, Frank. You're fighting for a ghost." The psychological blow was more effective than any bullet. The men behind Moretti looked at each other. The foundation of their world, the hierarchy, the protection, the family, was crumbling. If there was no outfit, there was no paycheck. There was no loyalty. One of the men, a seasoned enforcer named Tony, stood up, his hands raised. "I'm out. Silas, I'm out. I don't want no part of—" A single shot rang out. Not from Vane, from Moretti. Tony slumped over the kitchen island, his blood dripping into a bowl of fruit. "Nobody quits," Moretti hissed, his eyes wide and manic. "We finish the job. We kill the witness, we kill Vane, and we take the ledgers. We start our own outfit." This was the legend effect in its darkest form, the moment a leader loses his mind to the myth of his own power. Moretti wasn't a strategist anymore. He was a cornered animal. But cornered animals are the most dangerous, and Moretti had 1 card left to play. 12:50 a.m., the back stairs. Moretti signaled his last 2 men to head for the basement. He knew the house had an old coal chute that led to the alley. If they couldn't go out the doors, they'd go under them. They moved through the shadows, their footsteps muffled by the chaos of the burning curtains and the groaning floorboards. Vane was still upstairs, presumably hunting for Miller, who had vanished in the smoke. As they reached the basement door, Moretti felt a cold draft. The air down here was different, damp, earthy, and smelling of ancient coal dust. "Through there," Moretti whispered, pointing to the small iron door of the chute. One of his men, Rico, scrambled toward it. He yanked the handle. It didn't budge. He pulled harder, his muscles straining. "It's welded shut, Frank," Rico whispered, panic rising in his voice. They welded it from the outside. The realization settled in. Silas Vane hadn't just trapped them. He had curated their deaths. The house was a tomb. Suddenly the light in the basement flickered on. Standing at the top of the stairs wasn't Vane. It was Thomas Miller. The accountant looked different. His glasses were gone. His face was smeared with soot, and he was holding a double-barreled shotgun he had salvaged from the dead marshals. He looked like a man who had finally realized that in a world of monsters, you have to become one to survive. "You thought I was the prey," Miller said, his voice surprisingly steady. But I've been keeping the books for 10 years, Frank. I know how much a life is worth, and right now, yours isn't worth the lead in this gun." Moretti laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "You don't have the guts, Tom. You're a bean counter." "I was," Miller agreed, "until tonight." Miller pulled the trigger. The explosion in the confined space was deafening. 1:10 a.m., the basement floor. The shotgun blast caught Rico square in the chest, throwing him back into the coal bin. The other enforcer fired wildly at the stairs, but Miller had already retreated into the darkness of the upper floor. Moretti was alone. He stood in the center of the basement, his .45 empty, his knife drawn. He was the Blade, after all. He had earned that name in the trenches of the docks, and he wasn't going down without a fight. "Vane! Miller!" Moretti screamed, his voice echoing off the concrete. "Come and get me!" Silence. Then a soft footfall. Silas Vane stepped out from behind a furnace. He had discarded the Thompson and held a long, thin stiletto. "One-on-one, Frank?" Vane asked. "For old time's sake? Before the feds burn this place to the ground to cover their tracks?" The two men circled each other. This was the climax of a decade of rivalry, a clash of two different eras of crime. Moretti was the old guard, brute force and intimidation. Vane was the new breed, calculated, cold, and invisible. They lunged. The fight was a blur of silver and shadows. Moretti was larger, but Vane was faster. Steel clashed against steel. Moretti managed to slice Vane's cheek, a thin red line appearing on the white-suited man's face. Vane didn't flinch. He drove his blade through Moretti's shoulder. Moretti roared in pain, swinging his heavy fist, but Vane danced away. "You're slow, Frank," Vane whispered. "The world moved on while you were busy counting your protection money." Above them, the house began to groan. The fire, started by a stray bullet in the kitchen, was spreading. The ceiling was beginning to blacken. Moretti looked up, and in that moment of distraction, Vane moved. He didn't kill Moretti. He drove the blade through Moretti's hand, pinning it to the wooden support beam of the house. "I'm not going to kill you, Frank," Vane said, stepping back. "The fire will. But first, someone wants to say goodbye." 1:25 a.m. The burning basement. Thomas Miller stepped out of the shadows. He looked at Moretti, who was struggling like a trapped animal, his hand pinned to the beam. The flames were licking at the floorboards above them, sending showers of sparks down like hellish snow. Vane handed Miller a small charred notebook, the real ledgers. "Take them," Vane said. "Go out the service entrance. There's a car waiting 2 blocks over. The feds think I'm killing everyone. They won't look for a dead man." Miller took the books. He looked at Moretti, whose face was contorted in pain and rage. "Why?" Moretti gasped. "Why let him go?" Vane smiled. "Because the world needs a legend, Frank. They need to know that 9 of the outfit's best went into a house to kill 1 man, and only the weak man walked out. It's bad for business. It destroys the fear, and without fear, you have nothing." Miller stepped close to Moretti. He leaned in, his breath hot against the mobster's ear. "I have a message for whoever is left," Miller whispered. He spoke a single sentence, a sentence so chilling that Moretti stopped struggling. His eyes widened, and for the first time in his life, the Blade looked truly terrified. Vane and Miller turned and walked toward the hidden exit, leaving Moretti alone in the growing inferno. The heat was becoming unbearable. The smell of burning wood and melting lead filled the air. Moretti looked at his pinned hand. He looked at the knife. He had a choice: stay and burn, or do the unthinkable to survive. As the stairs collapsed in the roar of flame, a single agonizing scream ripped through the house. The legend of the Cicero slaughter was born in that scream, but the true horror was yet to be delivered. August 16th, 1934. 6 a.m. A diner on the outskirts of Chicago. The morning sun was a pale, sickly yellow through the smog. Thomas Miller sat at the counter, a cup of black coffee steaming in front of him. His clothes were singed, his face was bruised, but he was alive. He was the one who walked out. Across from him sat the federal agent he had met 3 days ago. The agent looked nervous, his eyes darting to the door. "You're supposed to be dead, Tom," the agent whispered. "The report says the house was a total loss, no survivors." Miller pushed the charred notebook across the counter. "I'm a ghost now, but I have the message. The one Silas Vane told me to deliver to you and to your bosses in D.C. The agent opened the notebook. Inside, on the first page, was a list of names. Not mobsters, politicians, judges, police chiefs. And next to each name was a price, the exact amount the outfit had paid for their souls. "The message is this," Miller said, his voice cold and hollow. "The outfit didn't build this city. You did. They were just the contractors, and now that the contractors are dead, the bill is coming due to the owners." Miller stood up and walked out of the diner, disappearing into the morning mist. He was never seen again. Some say he moved to South America. Others say he became a cleaner himself, working in the shadows. But the legend of the Nine lived on. For decades, gangsters in Chicago would tell the story of the night 9 men went to kill a canary, and the canary burned the whole forest down. They whispered about the message and the man in the white suit who watched it all happen. The Cicero slaughter didn't just end the outfit's reign, it changed the way the city looked at power. It proved that the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one with the gun, it's the one with the truth. What would you have done in Miller's shoes? Would you have stayed a victim, or would you have burned it all down to be free? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the dark heart of Chicago's history, hit the like button and subscribe for more cinematic true crime stories. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Silas Vane was real or just a myth created to cover the Fed's tracks?